History has been made today. Donald Trump is officially the President of the United States of America. And what does this mean for India? To actually answer that question, I'm joined by none other than Lalit Mansingh. Mr. Mansingh, thank you so much for joining us on Bloomberg Quint. Mr. Mansingh, of course, has been a former Indian ambassador to the United States and also the former Foreign Secretary of India. Mr. Mansingh, I'd like to start by asking you the question on everyone's minds, be it in terms of immigration, in terms of bilateral trade or free trade, and also in terms of security. What do you think this means for India now that Donald Trump is president?
Well, I know that there's a lot of anxiety and sometimes fear about Trump presidency, because so little is known about Mr. Trump's views on a lot of things. But if you narrow it down to Indo-US relations, I have no sense of anxiety, because I think Indo-US relations are strong. They have survived Republican and Democratic changes of leadership, and I have full confidence that under Trump presidency this relationship will continue. What I expect is a short period of interruption in the dialogue, largely because Mr. Trump will take his time to assemble his team and put them in place. Also that India is not a top priority for him. India is not a problem partner, and therefore his attention will be on resolving the more immediate issues. But a couple of positives have emerged from the campaign.
Right.
Firstly, the Republican platform, their manifesto, has very warm words of praise about India. They have described India as a valued strategic partner, strategic security and economic partner. There were also nice things said about the possibility of Mr. Trump and Prime Minister Modi meeting, and the former speaker, Mr. Newt Gingrich, in one of his speeches said, Mr. Trump and Mr. Modi make a wonderful fit. So I think the chemistry between the two leaders will be good, knowing that they have similar ideological leanings and they have many things in common. So I expect that Indo-US relations will remain strong as before. In fact, in some ways it could also positively become better, but that we can discuss during the rest of the interview.
Of course, Mr. Mansingh, and when you talk about international trade, it's important in terms of the relations between the major powers around the world. Now, we know that Mr. Trump has some views on Russia, some particular views on China and India in terms of how we're impacting their jobs, and also in terms of Pakistan and how he wants to clamp down on terrorism. These were actually, they sounded like political rhetoric in his campaigns, but now that he's president, clearly this would translate into something.
Well, if you have studied American elections, there's a lot of rhetoric which doesn't translate into actual policy after the elections. Example, John Kerry, when he was a presidential candidate, was regularly doing India bashing and saying the same things, that India is stealing the jobs from the Americans. But John Kerry, as Secretary of State, was completely different. I don't think it will be very different in the case of Mr. Trump. Of course, he said that Americans have lost jobs because other countries have been taking them away, and India, China, and he mentioned a few other countries. But the fact is, he did reach out to the Indian American community. He attended their rallies, said nice things about India, had nice things to say about the Indians in the United States. So I don't think he has a negative perception of India. That's good. Secondly, Mr. Trump, like Prime Minister Modi, is pro-business. He's a businessman himself, and he sees the value of business relations. So I think on the trade front, we are going to see a lot of positive movement. Of course, we are not affected by this, but Mr. Trump has criticized the Trans-Pacific Partnership and NAFTA and trade agreements. We are not affected by that. We are not in any such group agreement with the United States. When it comes to foreign policy, let's see the areas in which there might be some change. And I can think of two areas where there are expectations that things might even be better. One is on counterterrorism cooperation. And while the American administrations have been vocal in giving support to counterterrorism, that has not translated into 100% satisfaction for India, because India's terrorism comes basically from its neighborhood. And currently the government is putting this across to the international community to recognize that Pakistan is the primary source of international terrorism and we are its biggest victim. So in this situation, I expect that Mr. Trump, who is also very strong on security issues and has made it an election issue, will take a tougher line on Pakistan. Secondly, insofar as China is concerned, Mr. Trump has criticized China for its economic policies, and therefore I think he will harden his stand on China on economic issues, but he will also recognize that China has been a threat to the countries in the neighborhood in terms of its territorial claims, in terms of restrictions in the sea lanes of commerce and so on. So even on that front also, I expect that a new American administration will give greater support to India insofar the threat from China is concerned. So I'm actually, after a brief interruption in the relationship, which is inevitable when there is a change of government, I expect that we will come back to a very strong relationship, and as I mentioned, possibilities even that it could be better in many areas.
Interesting, Mr. Mansingh. You know, it's actually very interesting that you say that, because clearly from his electoral campaign, Donald Trump had this very different approach towards Russia as when you compare him to any other presidential candidate. And then you talk about, you know, how he might clamp down on things in Pakistan as well. And that would put India in a very sweet spot, wouldn't it?
Well, yes, indeed, because we were a bit uncomfortable with the way US-Russian relations were developing, because we have traditionally very strong links with Moscow. And even though Russia is not the Soviet Union, but we still maintain very close partnership with Russia. Russia is a principal partner in energy supplies in India. I mean, we have stakes in the Sakhalin oil fields. The Russians are building nuclear reactors, which are actually providing power in India. So we have, and Russia is one of the principal sources of our military technology. So when relations between the US and Russia were getting strained, it put us in a rather embarrassing position. And many in the strategic community felt that we shouldn't move that close to the United States, and maybe we should get closer to Moscow and keep a kind of balance between our two friends.
Rather than burn one of those bridges.
That's right. And now with Mr. Trump himself wanting to improve relations with Russia, I think it's a win-win for us.
Interesting, Mr. Mansingh. As a parting question, you know, immigration has been a contentious issue across the pond with Brexit, and of course with this election, with talk of a wall being built. I know, you know, with our visa situation is a little different, but the basic sentiment being that, you know, it was a little protectionist, and, you know, they didn't want outsiders coming in either jurisdiction. So with this Trump presidency now that has been announced, do you think that he will clamp down on H-1B visas, or, you know, on the Indian community that's really heading there?
Well, I think there's a confusion here between immigration, particularly illegal immigration, and legal entry for business purposes. India's interest is not in the immigration policy of the United States. And Trump has been very strong on illegal immigration, particularly from Mexico. That policy is not of relevance to India. What matters to us is what kind of visas are issued to our professionals who go there for short-term and long-term employment. Now, the visa restrictions are creating problems for Indian professionals in carrying out their business obligations in the United States. And this is where we have to put across our very strong view that visa restrictions on business professionals need to be eased for better business relationship between the two countries. There is also the allied case of the totalization issue, which is what the American government deducts from the salaries of Indian professionals, which is supposed to be refunded. It's an amount which is close to $1 billion a year. But the Americans have not been refunding it because they feel that India doesn't have a social security system. So we want that to be resolved, and the legitimate dues of Indian professionals should be given back to them. Now, this is not the same as illegal immigration. In fact, American immigration laws have enabled 3 million people of Indian origin to settle down there as American citizens. We have no quarrels with that.
Mr. Mansingh, thank you so much for such a candid chat and joining us on Bloomberg Quint.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Thank you.
So thank you so much. I truly mean it from the bottom of my heart. It was a great interview.
Thank you.
I learned a lot today.